what can prehistoric humans, in studying them, tell us about story, why we have stories, why we have myths. And last time we were talking about this a bit. And so let's take a quick look at a chart here from my computer, where we see the old Stone Age and then the new Stone Age or Neolithic with the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age back 2 million years ago. And obviously there's a little jump here, big jump rather, to the 28,000 years ago, where we have the first evidence of Paleolithic religious beliefs, temples and prayers and rituals, although we don't know. There probably were things earlier than that, but we don't have evidence of it. Here was the coldest period of the last ice age, which that's about 18,000 years ago. And the new Stone Age begins with the agricultural revolution around 10,000 years ago. The Neolithic agricultural revolution, that then you have several thousand years, and what we call the first civilizations, cities. Well, there were small cities, but permanent settlements around, what's that, 3,000 or late 200, 2000s BCE. So what we see here is that if you think about child development and how a child develops, it's a way of thinking about how human culture developed. And there's different theorists, and I'm going off of Robert Bellah. He's got a great book on let's get the title here, Religion in Human Evolution. It's a nice big fat book. Recommend. Got it from the library. And he's a source for a lot of this material, as are other theorists, one named Bruner, one named Donald. His last name is Donald. And Bruner and Donald trace the development of human culture and the pre-human culture in terms of enactive, symbolic, and conceptual, and mimetic, mythic, and theoretic. Let me go to the drawing board and draw this out a little bit if I can. There's my chart from last time. We might need to refer back to that, but let's look at something else right now, namely child development in terms and cultural development. And Bruner lists it in terms of enactive and then symbolic and then conceptual representation. So this is how people, humans, they would first enact their representation of reality, then they would do a symbolic representation, and then a conceptual or abstract representation. And Donald comes up with a very similar triad, which he calls mimetic, where you're imitating a motion or an action or an event, a mythic representation, and a theoretic. So let me say a few more things about this, where the enactive is where you're imitating it. You're playing it out. There's a kind of aspect of play, like a child playing at being I don't know, fireman, or going through the motions, miming that event, play acting. Then they can do a symbolic representation of it through a drawing or through a story, a myth. And so that's the symbolic level. And then when you get to abstract ideas, that's going to be the conceptual or the theoretic representation. And Donald's first name is Merlin. Let's give him his name there. Merlin Donald has a book on this. I'm not going to give all the information, but he goes through this way of thinking about how human culture develops to a higher and higher level, and to the point where we are today. And so we have to think about this in terms of this development. And they both Bruner and Donald have a prior starting point, which Bruner calls episodic culture. Episodic, where it's more similar to the great apes, let's say, or many other animals for that matter, where they're in the moment. And so the person can enact something, imitate it, play it out, and that's very concrete. It's very tied to that situation, and then it's over. It's not something that you sort of remember, or you could learn something and just kind of repeat it, but it doesn't get developed. It's just a kind of quick and dirty thing that's episodic. It just happens episodically over and over again. But then this develops into these three further levels. And it's worth thinking about some aspects of this, where you think, people use gestures. And I mean, animals use gestures as well. Hey, come over here, just, kind of waving, or go away, or, different sort of gestures. And they can be, for example, in rhythm. And think about like banging on a drum. Who was the first human to sort of use rhythm as a way of communicating, of teaching, of showing people and getting them together? This is also a way of bonding, because apes and other animals, they groom each other as a way of bonding, kind of cleaning each other up, grooming. That's how they bond. And so our earlier ancestors would have done the same thing, but then they could develop further, and they have these gestures, they have rhythm. And then they're going to develop into speech. And I'm going to distinguish, as does Bellah, Robert Bellah, between speech and language. And so, like the great apes, like chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and others, they can chatter without abstraction. They don't have an abstract idea of fear or of courage. They don't have those abstractions. Whereas once you have language, then you can start doing things like abstractions, like these words that you can generalize. They're sort of universal things. Like the concept of courage is this kind of universal idea. And in fact, some theorists, I don't know if it's true, but some theorists say at this moment of speech, they would call this a funny thing called musy language. So it's not quite music and it's not quite language. It's musy language. And it's kind of shouting or gesturing or and this can be the beginning of ritual where you're making a noise and creating excitement and rousing people and getting them maybe even with a song and with a dance. These are the beginnings of ritual. And of course, all this involves play, imitating, pretending. And so let's draw another chart here. Where we have the kind of episodic culture, the earlier culture I was talking about, without abstraction. Then you have the mimetic culture, mime, like imitating. Mimesis is the Greek word. It's used for imitation, which often is used for like art. And then we have narrative culture, story, mythic culture. And so these are those levels we're sort of looking at it sideways here, where in the episodic culture, the persons would kind of be what we would call solipsists. They're stuck in themselves, solipsistic, where they can't communicate their inner life, their consciousness. They don't communicate that. They have that for themselves, and they have kind of gestures and motions, but they don't really communicate more than that. Whereas with mimetic culture, what are you doing? You're making an event about an event. And so you have, let's say, a cave painting, and you're indicating through sound and gesture how in this painting of people hunting a mammoth, you what happened? Like, what was the event? And so you can share that with the others. And so your consciousness now it goes into other people's minds. And this is, a very powerful way of communicating, which we still do today. And it's very good at communicating emotion. It's very good at transmitting a sense of self and identity, like, hey, we're part of this together. We're on this team. We're the hunting team, let's say, or the gathering team. And then we get to the narrative myth culture, where it's not just an event, but you're giving an account of a string of events. It's a story. And they're organized hierarchically, which means you value certain things. You're hierarchically organizing things. We value what? Certain foods, we value certain goals, we value certain, winning in a battle, certain virtues, courage. And so this is going to be language, abstraction, like courage. And this is going to lead to a huge explosion of growth, huge growth. In fact, well, both of these lead to huge growth, but this, even more so. And so, but I want to underline the importance of the mimetic culture. Even though we get beyond that, we're not done with that. Even today in our 21st century, and we tend to forget about this. That's why I guess I want to underline this, because I'm focusing on myths. But to get to the myths, we need this embodied gestural dance, music, rhythm. These don't go away. We still communicate with these things. mistakenly think, oh, those things are just for earlier, not as smart people as we are. Now we can just kind of read the book or watch the video, and we don't really need to learn with these other parts of our body and our personality and our experience. No, we do need this mimetic culture. And so, and this developed over a long period of time. This and it continues to develop. I mean, think about consumer culture, the consumer rituals that we have today. Like, it's still there. Going to the mall, joining your group, in terms of what you wear and how you talk and what language, what music you listen to, and so forth. Okay, so this is mimetic culture. And so again, like, I think the cave painting example is a great example, and I keep going back to that. We don't that's all we have. We have their cave paintings. I'm sure they had other ways, through music and gesture and other images which didn't last, but the cave paintings happen to be the ones which have lasted for the tens of thousands of years, so that we can still see them. Good. And so what about this? Let's go then to this third aspect, which is the narrative and the mythic. And this is really the heart of what I'm getting at. And this is, as we said, a string of events. And this gets us into a deeper sense of time. And so you have the beginning, the middle, and the end, which means we have a concept of an end. We have a concept of a future, of a past, of a memory, of imagination. And so this is a crucial development in human technology. I'm calling this a technology story. Others have called it that. Drawing a blank on the name. Angus Fletcher has a book on this technology of story and how stories have been powerfully productive for human culture. And this is also the part of the right hemisphere of the brain. I love the hemispheres, and you'll hear me talking about them a lot, where the meaning happens. Because it's not just the event, but what does it mean? And so we have, I love my left hemisphere, but I want to focus on the right hemisphere. That's where the mythos, that's where the meaning, that's where the direction, the value, that's where meaning happens. And so you're creating metaphors to target. So like you have the metaphor of targeting, like a target, or of growing. Okay, this is a tough year, but I'm going to grow through this. I'm not literally growing. I've already grown, but we have this metaphor of growth through suffering. And a lot of this has to do with suffering and facing mortality and facing limitation. This is going to really create the great cultures of the Axial Age, which we're going to get to in the next episode. But yeah, so we have these metaphors and we're modeling the world. And so it's not just rebuilding an episode, but it's a whole world view or a whole world feel. It's not just the view. It's not just what I'm seeing of the world, but it's how I feel the world in my gut, in my desires, as well as my intellect. And so that's where the mythos, the mythic aspect develops. We can understand cause and effect, predict the future, try to control things. We can control a lot with our technology and with our ingenuity. And so then we get into these, we're going to get into the Axial Age. There was this big collapse of societies through most of the world. And I've ordered this book, I haven't gotten it yet, called 1177 BCE. So, but something happened around 1177, around 1200 BCE, where a lot of civilizations crashed. Like something happened. Was it a plague? Was it some cultural disaster? But anyway, there's that moment, and then out of that chaos, now like these small warring bands, grows the great religions, philosophies of the axial age. Axial means like a turning point, like this axis, which will really lead to the development of society and of myth. And the myth kind of gets transformed into philosophy. Again, that's next time. And so this moment of around 1177, there were these archaic religions, these early civilizations, the ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, Mesopotamia, and so forth. In Mesopotamia, take Mesopotamia just for a second, which is now today in Iraq, Iraq, there around 4000 BCE was this huge explosion of small settlements. And so some of them actually getting pretty big, like 50,000 people, pretty big actually. And they're starting to have language written down, writing. Not all civilizations got writing. A lot of them just kept it more for just recording like money transactions, which was important, obviously. But it took a longer time for most of them to really develop into the writing of stories. And so that's where we're going next. So stay tuned for that. And this is our ongoing journey through the origins of myth, the origins of story, how humans develop these technologies to deal with the meaning crises of their age, so that we're going to use it for our age. I'm going to argue we need these myths, we need these stories. We can't just discard them because we're so technologically advanced now. No, we still need to read these ancient stories and imbibe them and cogitate about them and discuss them and do what like Plato would do, dialogues. We need to talk about it with each other in dialogues. Plato wrote these wonderful dialogues to get us to dialogue. So stay tuned for more on Plato and others in the Axial Age next time.